A moment months in the making for just the fourth time in U.S. history.
The House Committee on the Judiciary is introducing 2 articles of impeachment charging the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump, with committing high crimes and misdemeanors.
The first article, introduced by House Democrats, abuse of power, charging the president with dangling a White House meeting and military aid money to Ukraine in exchange for its leaders publicly announcing investigations that would benefit his re-election. The second article, obstruction of Congress, for blocking testimony from key administration officials in what Democrats describe as unprecedented, categorical, and indiscriminate defense.
This just happened. We are witnessing one of the most significant ruptures in the history of the American executive branch. For the first time in history, the machinery is officially in motion to impeach a president for a third time. This is not a drill, and it is not just political rhetoric. A specific resolution is now sitting in the House, and the trigger for this escalation was the deadly enforcement operation in Minneapolis. We are looking at a situation where the opposition party has moved past warnings and is now issuing direct ultimatums to the White House regarding the Department of Homeland Security. The stakes here are immediate. We are talking about the potential collapse of a cabinet position, a constitutional standoff over executive authority, and a presidency that is now operating under the shadow of a loaded institutional gun. The political ceasefire is over. The opposition has signaled that they are willing to paralyze the legislative agenda to force accountability for the deaths of American citizens. This is a moment of extreme danger for the administration, and the clock has officially started ticking on the next phase of this crisis. We need to walk through exactly what is happening inside the Capitol right now, because the situation has shifted from theoretical threats to concrete legislative action. The central piece of this crisis is a document known as House Resolution 353. This resolution was filed quietly in 2025, but it has now become the focal point of the entire Democratic strategy. It is not a symbolic gesture. It is a fully drafted, comprehensive impeachment framework containing 7 specific articles against Donald Trump. This document is currently sitting in committee, effectively waiting for the green light to be activated. The content of this resolution is extensive. It frames the current presidency as a criminal enterprise. The first article charges the president with obstruction of justice, citing specific instances of witness intimidation and interference with investigations. The second article focuses on the usurpation of congressional spending power, arguing that the White House has bypassed the legislature to fund operations that were never authorized. The third article addresses the abuse of trade and emergency powers, specifically looking at how tariff threats have been used to coerce allies and domestic industries. The charges go deeper. Article 4 accuses the president of attacking free speech and violating the First Amendment rights of protesters and journalists. Article 5 is particularly significant regarding the structure of the government. It alleges the creation of an illegal office, specifically the Department of Government Efficiency run by Elon Musk. The argument here is that this department was established without congressional approval and is operating outside the law. Article 6 charges the president with bribery and corruption, and Article 7 focuses on the intimidation of judges.
Make impeachment out of nothing. That was a perfect conversation.
The president's allies argue the Democrats' case is based on hearsay.
When you have abuse of power, which is an amorphous topic that can be anything they want it to be, there's just wafer thin evidence for this.
Speaker Pelosi, Adam Schiff, and her counterparts have been abusing the power of impeachment because they're afraid Donald Trump will get reelected on his own.
Today's announcement sets up a House vote to impeach the president as soon as next week. And with Democrats in the majority, it's expected to pass along party lines.
This last article has become the most urgent because of recent events. The catalyst that brought this resolution back to the forefront is the situation in Minneapolis. We have confirmed reports of a crackdown operation led by Immigration and Customs Enforcement that resulted in the deaths of 2 American citizens identified as Renee and Alex Prey. These deaths occurred under the direct supervision of the Department of Homeland Security, led by Secretary Kristi Noem. The reaction from the Democratic caucus has been immediate and severe. They are characterizing this not as a policy failure, but as a killing spree funded by taxpayer dollars. This has led to a specific ultimatum. More than 80 House Democrats have signed on to articles of impeachment specifically targeting Secretary Noem. This is a massive number. It signals that this is not a fringe movement, but a consensus position within the party. The message they are sending to the White House is simple and brutal. They are telling the president to fire Secretary Noem immediately, or they will move to impeach her. They have framed this as a choice between the easy way and the hard way. If the president removes her, he might be able to de-escalate. the situation. If he keeps her, he forces a constitutional fight. The president's reaction to this ultimatum has been to double down. Instead of distancing himself from the Minneapolis operation, he is defending the secretary. He is brushing off court orders that have attempted to halt these operations. Reports indicate there are nearly 100 violated court orders at this point. By doing this, the president is trying to project strength and control. He is signaling to his base that he will not be bullied by the opposition. However, insiders suggest that this projection of strength is masking a deep sense of paranoia. The reality is that the president is trapped. The opposition has made it clear that impeachment is no longer a hypothetical scenario. It is a weapon that is loaded and sitting on the table. Every time the president defends the Minneapolis operation, and every time he ignores a court order, he is providing more evidence for the existing articles of impeachment. He is essentially writing the case against himself. The Democrats are documenting every statement and every defiance of judicial authority. They are adding these new events to Article 7 regarding the intimidation of judges and Article 1 regarding obstruction. The timeline for this escalation is linked directly to the 2026 midterm elections. The strategy from the opposition is clear. They are building the case now so that if they win the majority in the House in 2026, they can move immediately to impeachment. Private conversations reported by major outlets confirm that Democrats are admitting this plan behind closed doors. They are saying that if they get the gavel, a third impeachment is inevitable. Republicans are aware of this and are already trying to use it as a campaign issue, warning voters that the opposition is planning to remove the president. This dynamic has created a situation where the presidency is being haunted by the threat of removal. It is affecting every decision the White House makes. The president cannot simply govern because he has to calculate whether every move will be used as ammunition against him. He is stuck in a cycle where he feels he must be aggressive to satisfy his base, but that very aggression is what fuels the impeachment case. If he moderates his behavior or fires Secretary Noem, he risks looking weak and losing the support of his core voters. If he continues on his current path, he guarantees a legislative war. The pressure is also coming from the Democratic base. Activists and donors are demanding action. They are viewing the deaths in Minneapolis as a red line that cannot be crossed without consequences. Leadership in the House is trying to balance this anger with political strategy. They are focusing their public messaging on economic issues and the cost of living while quietly preparing the impeachment machinery in the background. They do not want to make the election solely about the president, but they are preparing to strike the moment they have the power to do so. This is the trap the president is currently in. He is trying to act like he is above the law, but the legal and political walls are closing in. The existence of the Department of Government Efficiency is being framed as a structural violation of the Constitution. The deaths in Minneapolis are being framed as a violation of basic civil rights. The defiance of court orders is being framed as a breakdown of the rule of law. All of these separate scandals are feeding into the single vessel of House Resolution 353. The administration's refusal to acknowledge the severity of the Minneapolis incident is the key driver here. By insisting that the operation was justified and by protecting the secretary involved, the president is tying his own fate to hers. He is making himself responsible for the outcome. The opposition is using this to argue that the president has learned nothing from his previous impeachments. They are arguing that he feels he is untouchable, and that is why they must use the ultimate remedy. As we look at the situation today, the resolution is ready. The evidence is being compiled daily. The support within the opposition party has reached a critical mass. The only thing missing is the majority vote, which will be decided in the upcoming midterms. Until then, the government is operating in a state of suspended animation where every executive action is being weighed against the likelihood that it will be included in the articles of impeachment. The president is trying to outrun the consequences of his actions, but the machinery of accountability is moving forward, fueled by the very defiance he is using to try and stop it. We need to step back and analyze why this specific moment matters so much in the broader context of American political history. What we are seeing is not just another political skirmish, it is a fundamental stress test of the checks and balances system. When we look at history, impeachment was designed as a safety valve, a mechanism to be used only in the most extreme circumstances to protect the republic from tyranny. For most of American history, it was a theoretical power, rarely touched. Now we are seeing the normalization of impeachment as a tool of political warfare, but we are also seeing something else, the normalization of executive defiance. In the past, the mere threat of impeachment or congressional investigation was often enough to force a correction in presidential behavior. During the Watergate scandal, the pressure from Congress and the courts eventually forced Richard Nixon to resign before he could be impeached. The institutions held enough power that the president felt he had to bow to them. In the late 1990s, Bill Clinton fought impeachment, but he did so by triangulating and working within the system to maintain his popularity. He did not openly defy the authority of the courts in the same way we are seeing now. The current situation is different because the fear mechanism is broken. The president is not moderating his behavior in the face of these threats. He is accelerating it. The fact that there are nearly 100 court orders being ignored regarding the Minneapolis operation is a staggering detail. It suggests that the executive branch has decided that judicial orders are suggestions rather than mandates. This creates a constitutional crisis that goes far beyond a single presidency. If the executive branch can simply ignore the judiciary and the legislature without immediate consequence, the tripod of American government collapses into a single pillar of power. We must also look at the specific nature of the charges in House Resolution 353 compared to history. The inclusion of an article regarding the Department of Government Efficiency run by a private citizen is a unique historical development. It represents a challenge to the very structure of government bureaucracy. It raises the question of whether a president can outsource executive authority to private individuals outside of the confirmation process. This is a battle over who actually runs the government, the elected officials and confirmed secretaries, or an inner circle of appointees operating in the shadows. The Minneapolis incident adds a layer of gravity that distinguishes this from purely procedural disputes. When American citizens are killed during a domestic enforcement operation, the stakes shift from legal theories to life and death. Historically, domestic unrest and the use of force against citizens have been the most dangerous moments for any administration. The Kent State shootings during the Nixon era, for example, permanently damaged the legitimacy of that administration. The difference here is the partisan divide. One side sees a killing spree, while the other sees law and order. This fragmentation of reality makes it impossible to have a unified national response. Furthermore, the concept of a third impeachment moves us into uncharted territory. The first impeachment is a shock, the second is a pattern, the third becomes a permanent state of war between the branches. It suggests that the legislative branch views the executive not as a rival to be negotiated with, but as an illegitimate force that must be constantly besieged. This creates a paralyzed government. It means that legislative energy is entirely consumed by the fight for removal rather than policymaking. We also have to analyze the strategy of haunting the presidency. This is a psychological siege as much as a political one. By keeping the resolution pending and threatening the cabinet secretary first, the Democrats are applying a pressure tactic designed to fracture the administration from the inside. They are testing the loyalty of the president's subordinates. They are forcing every person working in the White House to wonder if they will be the next target of an impeachment resolution. This creates an environment of fear and paranoia inside the executive branch, which leads to mistakes, leaks, and further instability. This moment is a collision of two unstoppable forces, an executive branch that believes it has a mandate to act without restraint, and a legislative opposition that believes it has a moral duty to stop a dangerous leader. In previous eras, there were dealmakers in the middle who would de-escalate this tension. Today, those middle ground figures are gone. The system is rigid, and rigid systems tend to break rather than bend. The events unfolding now are testing whether the Constitution can survive a president who ignores it and a Congress that can only enforce it through the ultimate political weapon. Looking at the immediate future, the consequences of this standoff are going to be messy and disruptive. In the short term, we should expect total legislative gridlock. With the threat of impeachment hanging over the White House, there will be no cooperation on bipartisan bills, budgets, or appointments. The government will likely operate on continuing resolutions and executive orders, further deepening the rift between the branches. The administration will likely intensify its tough stance to prove that the impeachment threat is not working, which means we could see more aggressive operations similar to Minneapolis, leading to more civil unrest. We also need to look at the fate of Secretary Noem. The pressure on her is unsustainable. While the president is currently defending her to save face, history shows that presidents eventually cut loose liabilities when the political cost becomes too high. If the impeachment of the secretary moves forward and gains traction, we might see a voluntary resignation to avoid a Senate trial that would air all the details of the Minneapolis deaths. However, if the president keeps her to prove a point, the House will likely turn the hearings into a daily televised spectacle that damages the entire party going into the midterms. The 2026 midterm elections will effectively become a referendum on the rule of law. If Democrats win the House, the third impeachment of Donald Trump is a virtual certainty. This would consume the entirety of the second half of his term. The Senate, assuming it remains difficult to reach a two-thirds majority for conviction, will likely acquit again. But the process itself is the punishment. It freezes the presidency, destroys the president's legacy, and dominates the news cycle for years. Long-term, this sets a dangerous precedent for the American presidency. We are moving toward a parliamentary-style system where a president who loses the support of the legislature faces constant attempts at removal. It erodes the stability of the four-year term. It also suggests that future presidents will likely face impeachment as a standard tool of opposition regardless of the party in power. The threshold for what constitutes an impeachable offense is being lowered, or rather broadened, to include intense policy disagreements and administrative overreach. Finally, the psychological toll on the country cannot be ignored. A nation that sees its leader impeached 3 times is a nation that has lost faith in its selection process. It creates a deep cynicism among voters. If the president acts with impunity and the only response is a legislative maneuver that fails to remove him, the public learns that there is no accountability. Conversely, if the president is removed, a massive portion of the electorate will view it as a coup. There is no clean exit from this. The machinery is in motion, and the collision is inevitable. The only variable left is how much damage the institutions sustain when the impact finally happens.